My name is Ronni. I'm a roaster at Mungo Coffee, and I'm here to demonstrate to you how to do a cupping at the pleasure of your own home. The value of cupping is that you get to really compare and contrast different cups of coffee, which you might not typically do in a traditional home setup, because when I have a cup of coffee at home, I have one bag, then I run through it, then I go through another bag. But the thing about cupping in both the professional and the home setup is that it really lets you compare and contrast different types of coffee by eliminating as many other factors. You don't brew differently, you don't grind differently, you don't set it up differently. You do your utmost best to set everything up the exact same way that you can every time that you happen to cup, so that you can be like, oh, I taste this difference, or I taste this flavor profile difference, and you can be like, oh, that's inherent to the coffee, not necessarily how I was brewing, how I was happened to pour my pour over that day. So that's why for me, cupping is a really valuable tool as a roaster, being like, hey, from roast to roast, this is what's the flavor difference. And from a home setup, it really helps me practice like, hey, these are the flavor notes for this is the flavor note for that. Here's the difference between these two qualities in a coffee. So that's kind of like the value of learning how to cup at home. But what we're gonna cup with today is gonna be our three coffees in our this week's Roasters Roulette. It's gonna be our Bali Natural, our Ethiopia Washed, and our Guatemala Anaerobic Honey. Every week we try to rotate out our flavors of the Roasters Roulette. Our objective there is trying to give people a really easy opportunity to be like, hey, I don't know what I want yet, or hey, I want to gift coffee to somebody that I don't know what they want. And it's the broadest spectrum of coffee that we can offer to our customers. So we have a washed coffee, a natural coffee, and an anaerobic honey coffee, and those are all really different processes and different flavor profiles. So you can be like, hey, I'm pretty confident that I can tell you out of these three, which is my favorite more than anything else. So it's kind of a nice taste tester, I guess. But we're gonna start off by making sure that I have all the equipment that I need for tasting, and then tasting a cupping. And it's gonna be coffee, of course. You're gonna need cups, and this might be a little trickier in your home setup. You need multiple cups that are exactly the same, or at least you know what the volume is. So you're gonna need to know, hey, this is a 7-ounce cup, or this is an 8-ounce cup, or the like. I'm gonna need spoons. I personally prefer to use a bouillon spoon, but you can use really any spoon set up at home, but I prefer this because it really lets you slurp as easy coffee as well as you can. Also helps me try to avoid burning my tongue, which is kind of a thing that I risk very often by doing this. And then you're gonna need a scale that's gonna be sensitive to the 1/10 of a gram. You can get away with a gram sensitive scale, but I prefer a 1/10 of a gram sensitivity. And then of course you're gonna need a kettle of hot water, however you choose to warm it up. So we're gonna start off by measuring out my coffee. So I'm going to measure out a specific ratio of coffee to water ratio. The ideal setup, because cupping is something that can be very standardized, it is very standardized, and the golden ratio is 1 to 18.2. If you want to use round numbers, you can 1 to 18, or if you want to change that ratio, you're more than welcome in the home setup. The biggest thing for me and for you is going to be making sure that it's as consistent as you can. You can't change that ratio from day to day, week to week, from cup to cup even, because you really just want to be like, hey, I'm tasting this coffee as equally as I can. So I'm going to start off by scale, cup, and I'm going to pop open my Bali Natural. It is a cup. Pop this open. And for this cup, the specific gram weight that I'm going to put into it is 11.3 grams, because for me that's my 1 to 18 ratio of coffee to water. I'm going to pour in this 18.3. Slightly larger than I need. And then I'm going to take a couple beans. I'm going to put them off to the side in a separate cup. What this is do is that this is my coffee that I'm gonna brew. This is the coffee that I'm gonna purge my grinder with. So what that's gonna do is that's gonna get rid of any kind of extra flavors from the coffee that I ground before it, mostly because I am grinding multiple coffees in the same session. That'll help me get rid of the flavor of the previous coffee from my grinder by grinding just a little bit. I'm gonna throw that away, and then I grind the coffee that I'm actually gonna brew. Do this one, that, this right here. I always have a hard time keeping track of which coffee is which, so of course I have to try to remember it. If you're just doing 1 cup at a time, that's not a really big deal. If you're doing multiple cups at a time, of course you do want to mark it in one way, shape, or form. Coffee cuppings can go anywhere from, hey, I'm just gonna taste 5 different cups of the same coffee in terms of professional setting, or I'm gonna taste just 1 cup of a bunch of different coffees to try to see what's what. So again, home setup, you do you, whatever you like to do. I personally prefer, hey, I'm gonna taste 2 different coffees of the same process, see what the flavor notes there, see what's the same and what's different. You can see, hey, I'm gonna taste 2 different coffees from Colombia. What does that do for my flavor and things like that? And it really just kind of helps you develop a lot of the words, the lexicon, the kind of more practiced, hey, this tastes like that, or this is what a Colombian coffee, or this is what this varietal tastes like. And I know for a lot of people that can be really confusing, especially when you're looking at a coffee shelf, be like, oh my gosh, what do all these words mean? For me, cupping really helps me pinpoint, oh, hey, this is what a Catuai varietal tastes like. Hey, this is what a natural coffee tastes like. And helps me kind of make sure, really put it in my head like, oh, hey, so now when I go to a different coffee, I can know a little bit of what to expect. So what I'm gonna do right now is that I'm going to grind my purge and do this. Oh, but before that, I'm going to start setting up my water. Ideally, your water temperature is going to want to be anywhere from 195 to 205. Really what you're looking for is going to be a nice simmer, but not a boil. And you don't want to do too hot, you don't want to do too low, obviously. But again, if you do choose a specific temperature, just make sure you keep that the same from session to session. And then, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to grind my purge, get rid of that coffee, and then I'm gonna grind my actual coffee. And for grind setting, really what you're looking for is the most accurate grind that your coffee can offer. From a standardized point, if you want to go for like the SCA, which is the Specialty Coffee Association setting, really what they want or looking for is coffee that is ground a little coarser than what you do for maybe like a batch brew. So like a Mr. Coffee setup. But for us, I personally prefer to be to pick the most accurate setting. And what I mean by most accurate is where the coffee is basically ground as evenly as it can be. So for any grinder, typically where that's gonna be is right in the middle. Like say your coffee grinder has a setting from 1 to 11, like our EK does. The most accurate grind setting is going to be at 6. So that's typically what we grind on. And that can be different from a home setup to a semi home setup, some of the more elaborate grinders. But really what it means is that you find one you like, you pick it, you stick with it. And that's really the most important thing. So now I have all 3 coffees, all ground. And what I'm going to need is I'm going to set my pour over scale, which has a timer on it, making sure my water is at a light simmer, which I think it's just about to hit. And what you're gonna wanna do is pour it, not necessarily the fastest, not necessarily the slowest. Again, evenness is the name of the game. But what you do wanna do, as opposed to a pour over that you might be more familiar with, I want to avoid kind of any variable movements. Like trying to hit move the stream so it hits as many points as it can. In reality, you want to pick one point and pour at it. Mostly so again, you can pour it as consistently as you can. So once I start my timer, I'm going to start pouring, and just remember what direction you pour from. If it's left to right, right to left, middle, every other one, personal preference, but you just have to remember which cup you pour into first. And I'm going to be pouring right up to the brim, again, as evenly as I possibly can. You want to avoid any splashing, avoid any overflow. And these cups not only hold my purge from earlier, but what I do is I pour some hot water in this so that I can rinse my spoon, especially if I'm using one spoon for multiple coffees, or if I have some guests and companions essentially cupping with me, so that we can rinse our spoons in between uses for health and safety's sake. So now what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna wait for about 3 to 4 minutes, depending. Again, consistency more than anything. If you find that 4 minutes is too long, I'm like, I'm gonna shrink it a little bit. Or if you wanted to, if you tried at 3 and you find, oh my gosh, I'm gonna burn my tongue if I keep it this hot, then again, adjust it well. So basically what it's gonna be doing is really similar to more French press brewing. Is that full contact, you're not using a paper filter. What's gonna happen once we hit about, I personally prefer like 3-minute 15, 3-minute 30. I'm gonna start with the cup that I poured in first, mostly so that means that each one had an equal amount of contact, because if I start pouring here, but then I end the brewing on this side, then obviously this side's gonna brew a lot shorter than this side. But what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna take my spoon, I'm gonna dip it in, and I'm gonna knock the top surface of coffee down. And what that's gonna do, a lot like a French press, when you knock all the coffee down to the bottom, that basically stops brewing. The contact between the water and coffee is so low that it's pretty much where it's at. And from here on out, I'm gonna do my utmost best to not try to disturb the coffee any more than I am. So this, I've got these for hot water, really just depending on how many spoons you wanna wash at the end of the day. And then what I'm actually gonna grab right now is gonna be a little bit of a waste tub, because what's gonna happen is that afterwards, there's gonna be a little bit of kind of bubbles that you wanna scoop off the top, and you're obviously gonna wanna scoop that into a separate container. Gonna grab it over here, that's full of water. So I just hit 3 minutes. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start with this one, and what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna go in just beneath the surface and push 3 times. What this is a good opportunity to is that if you want to lean down and smell it while you're doing it, this is actually the point that releases basically the most amount of aromatics that a coffee does during the brewing cycle. So I can get a really accurate picture of what this coffee smells like just by smelling it as I'm pushing it. And what that's going to do, again, settle all the coffee down, and that's kind of kaput for the brewing. So my objective is to stir it 3 times, again, consistency. As you can see, everything down. So it goes from this to kind of this nice kind of crema, essentially crema foam on top. So now that you see that I have all of it's knocked down, so it's essentially stop brewing, I'm gonna take 2 spoons, whichever you please. I'm gonna take it, and then I'm gonna scoop all this foam off the top. So what that foam is that basically CO2 that was trapped in the bean that is now escaping. But if you leave that CO2 bubble layer on the top of your coffee, what it'll do is that it'll make everything taste almost not exactly the same, but it'll muddle the unique flavors of specific coffees. It'll make it taste just, I like to quantify it as the difference between a flat water and a sparkling water. That CO2 does have a specific flavor, and it can prevent you from really perceiving any deeper or truer flavors of a coffee. So it's really important for you to go like this, kind of dip it in. And I don't know if you'll notice, but I'm not reaching as deeply as I can, mostly because I want to avoid disturbing the bottom layer, because that means I'll start brewing the coffee more, which I obviously want to avoid, because again, that means this will be brewed more than this one, be brewed differently than this one, which is something you want to avoid the most. I'm dipping my spoon in to avoid cross-contamination, and then going like this, getting all the crema off the top. And you don't need to go crazy at this setup. You don't need to go, you don't need to get every single bubble off the top of the layer. Just enough that you're like, that looks pretty good to me, nothing crazy. Yeah, so this is where you basically start doing your dishes, start figuring out what you've ignored in the last 4 or 5 minutes, especially if you're at home. Basically, all I'm waiting for is for me to not burn my tongue, which I have happened to do at the very beginning of a tasting, and that's horrible because then I can't taste anything else, so then what was the point of all that? If you're doing it with multiple people, especially with, kind of the times as they are, what you're gonna wanna do is have a separate cup per person. And what you're gonna wanna do is have everybody have basically a spoon per coffee. and then you dip it into a separate cup, and then you slurp this. Because I'm doing this all on my lonesome, what I'm gonna be doing is just slurping straight from the spoon. And how you slurp is basically going to be really loud, really annoying, and really rude. You're gonna make the loudest noise as possible. You're gonna slurp it as far across your mouth as you can. One, that helps prevent burning. And then two, that helps you get the most accurate flavor that you can from one spoon of coffee. It basically sprays it all across your tongue so that you can taste as many notes as you can. So I think I'm about 8 minutes right now. You can push it to 10. You don't want to let the coffee temperature drop too much because, again, that's an inaccurate, essentially, view of what the coffee is offering. So whenever you're brave enough, so you typically between 8 to 10 minutes, you're good to go to start brewing. And what you're gonna do, again, never, never, never dip your spoon deep enough to hit that bottom layer of coffee that's settled on the bottom. You'll start the rebrewing process all over again. Do a little bit of this, do that. Again, loud, annoying, not acceptable in public slurping. And then in between, you should be rinsing your spoon for sanitation and to prevent cross-contamination between coffees. And what I'm looking for in tastings is that I'm looking for specific notes. Basically just trying to set as many data points as you can in terms of your coffee experience so that you can use that to make, basically just be as familiar as you can with the craft. So for my Guatemala anaerobic honey, I'm looking for really specific notes versus my Ethiopia wash versus my Bali natural. This is more of a unique situation because I know what those coffees should taste like because I'm the one that roasted them. So if I taste something different, then I'm like, oh no, something has gone horribly wrong. But for here, I'm gonna taste this. All taste really awesome in my personal opinion. And what I'm looking for here, and what I'm tasting pretty accurately in this one, I'm looking for strawberry, very light nuttiness in terms of that Ethiopia wash. I'm looking for really light, bright, not quite citrus notes, but pretty close to it. And for my Guatemala anaerobic honey, I'm really looking for basically just very light tea-like body and notes. And being able to describe things like that is partly what this helps me do. Like I'd be like, hey, this is what strawberry and almond-like notes taste in a coffee. This is what a little tea-like body feels like. And for me, cupping is a really valuable tool, and I've done it more working at Mungo than I think I would have ever in any other context. But it really just helps me be like, hey, I can tell you with confidence that this tastes like this tastes like that, which is not something I think I'd have in any other way. So. But really the value in it is like, hey, I can compare and contrast these two. I can compare and contrast all three of these. Because if you just taste one cup of coffee at a time, then I'm like, hey, what am I tasting? Is that how the person roasted it? Is it where it came from? Is it how it was made? So because of this process, and again, if they ever want any more official, like the exact terms of what grind setting amount, all that kind of stuff, they can look it up on SCA cupping protocols. It's a publicly available, here's how to cup according to the law, because it's basically the law when it comes to cupping protocols. And then, because we try to do that in an official setting. But again, it's just, cupping basically came about, and with the standardized protocol, to be able to communicate with different people across the world. Hey, we're tasting the same exact coffee, but how do we make sure that we're describing it and assessing it in the exact same way? One of the first things that you have to do in order to be able to even start that conversation is make sure that you're brewing it the same way. Because the setup that somebody might have at a coffee farm versus somebody that has it at the warehouse that it's stored in the US versus the person that's actually roasting it might be all completely different. Their setup, the equipment they have, the technology that they have access to. So again, if you notice, I'm not really using anything that's super elaborate. I'm not using anything, I don't even need a filter. I need cups that I'm confident on the volume of, which you can set up at home, and a timer, and a scale that is about average average consumer sensitivity, like nothing crazy, and like hot water. So it's kind of the universal, hey, here's how to brew the same cup of coffee as somebody in Guatemala, as somebody at one of the places that we get our green coffee from, and it's like a really good like handshake agreement. Hey, I think we're on the same level on how we're assessing coffee and how we're treating this coffee. So that's what's valued from the professional end, but on the consumer end, it's like, oh, hey, that's really crazy. Oh my God, do I need to be that molecularly precise? And you're like, as long as you keep it the same in your personal setup from week to week, because it's easy to go like, oh, I'll just change the grind or I'll change the volume. No, keep the same forever. No, but just be very honest with yourself and be like, hey, like, I'm going to do my best to assess all these coffees as evenly as I can, so I can be like, hey, I like this coffee more than that coffee. And it's not because like I messed up brewing one versus the other, is that I'm trying to do it on an even platform. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something today. My name is Ronni, signing off. Thanks for watching.